All right, so thanks everyone for attending this Jumpstart Your Professional Writing, cover letters, resumes, and more. We're so excited to have you all here. And just for our Mandel Student Services team, I'll do an intro. My name's Kelly Schmidt. I'm a Student Advancement Specialist. I use she, her pronouns. I'll pass it over to Charisse.
Hi, yes, my name is Charisse Muse. I'm also a Student Advancement Specialist, and I'll pass it over to Kim.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Kim McFarland, and I serve as the Assistant Dean of Student Services and Career Planning at the Mandel School. And it's great to see everyone, and we're expecting even more folks to join. So welcome, and thanks for taking time to be here today.
Yes, so thank you everyone again, and we'll get started shortly with our guests who are able to facilitate this session, but just a few housekeeping reminders. Please know if you submitted questions when you registered, we have those down and we'll get to them at the end of the session. And then also, if you didn't submit and you want to drop a question in the chat, feel free at any time to do so, and we'll wait to the end to ask them, but feel free to do that. Or wait to the end and come off mute if you'd like to as well to ask. But with that, we'll get started then. And so we have, I'll let our folks who are speaking today introduce themselves, but we have Brian Matthews, the Assistant Director of Experiential Learning, and then also Meredith Steck, the Assistant Director of the Writing Center here. So to really help us navigate this subject, but I'll pass it over to them to do intros for themselves too. So thank you.
Meredith? Oh, okay. Again, I'm Brian Matthews. I'm the Assistant Director for Experiential Education here at CASE. Basically, I do a great deal of career counseling and working with students and employers to really kind of connect you guys to opportunities with the employers. And it's great that I see a familiar name or two on the screen as far as attending. So looking forward to talking to you guys.
Yeah, hi, I'm Meredith Steck, again, Assistant Director of the Writing Center here. I also teach first year writing at CASE, but about half my job is devoted to the Writing Center. So I kind of help manage the writing schedule and setting you all up with folks who can read your writing and give you some feedback in maybe a lower stakes environment than maybe your advisor or a colleague. It's really nice to get a draft, especially of professional writing documents on as many readers as possible. And I like to think that we're here to provide those friendly and supportive readers for all writers at CASE. Go ahead, Brian.
So again, it's really a pleasure to speak with you guys about resumes and cover letters. So I'm going to talk about certainly the resume section. So one of the things we did is we took a fictitious resume online, and we decided to pick a job description that the candidate would potentially be applying to and really pattern our resume and cover letter based upon that specific job description. So before we start, in my opinion, there are 8 keys to effective resume writing. The first is really researching the organization. In many instances, students have a mindset of just applying to as many opportunities that they can. One of the things that we talk about is the importance of really doing the research, identifying whether or not the organization is the right fit, assessing its mission, what their vision is, certainly the leadership, the programs that the organization has, and really, again, assessing whether it's the right fit. After you decide, okay, this is the right fit, I always tell students to read the job description very, very carefully, noting the key skills, competencies, et cetera, that are actually listed, highlighting those key phrases and words that are there. And those will give you some indication of whether or not whether or not you should totally revamp your resume that you currently have, or maybe how you should maybe restructure the information on your existing resume to become more appealing to the reader. As many of you may know, many organizations, whether or not they're Fortune 500 or 100 or the nonprofit community, they in many instances use search engine optimization or AI technology. So it's really important to really try to incorporate some of that information within your resume. Assess obviously your skills and experiences and how you again will incorporate them in your resume. And it's important to focus on the outcomes and the impact that you've had in the jobs previously, so you can really begin to highlight that information on your resume. Not only conveying what you did, but again, what the impact was or what the intended goals were that you were trying to accomplish. And what many students just do on their resumes is they just put, I did X, Y, and Z. But if I'm an employer, I'm always thinking about how can they add value or how did they add value in their previous role. We go to the next slide. Assess the relevance of your experiences. Every experience that you currently have on your resume or that you've had may not be relevant to the job that you're specifically applying to. And if you really don't believe it's relevant, I strongly suggest you eliminate it. Remember that one size does not fit all. So if you're applying to 3, 4, or 5 positions, although some of the information on that resume will be the same, for example, maybe the education section, maybe even the certification section, you should have as totally different resumes for the most part for each job, because many of those jobs have different requirements that they are looking for. Number 7, timing is everything. Most employers take about 6 seconds or so to view every resume. And if you haven't structured the resume in a way that is appealing, that's easy to read, you're going to get passed on. So really be thinking about, is your resume, does it have the specific information in it that you should have or that would be appealing to the reader? And then last but not least, have someone else review your resume. You've got a close, intimate relationship with that resume. And I always use the example, the words TOO, TWO, and TO, all spelled two. You very well may not catch that if you don't have someone else taking a look at that, because one resume can doom your candidacy. So one of the things that we decided to do is structure the presentation where we are applying for the executive director position for the Neighborhood Leadership Institute. So as you see this job description at the top, these are the required qualifications that the employer put in this job description. Those items that are highlighted, in my opinion, are some of the things that you should be really considering highlighting or stressing in your resume as you move forward. But also, many employers will not only put required information or required skill sets, but they also will put skill sets or competencies which are preferred. So again, kind of keep in mind the required and the preferred. And even though you don't have the preferred skill sets, but you've got the things that are required, go for it. Okay. So I'm not going to show. I thought I could maybe show it. I can't. I don't want to screw this up anymore, longer than I had. But we selected Philip Lakey. He had a resume, and his existing categories were education, social work experience, related experiences with youth, training, his affiliations, and his interests. But based upon the job description that I just showed you, I thought it would be best to go ahead and really change his categories to more accurately reflect what the employer was actually looking for. So I selected program development, management, supervision, fundraising, and there's a typo right there. My apologies, and community collaborations. So don't be like Brian and misspell that. So I didn't have anybody look at this. Sorry about that. So we've got those 4 categories. Whoops. All right. So in Philip's resume, his old, at the top, his old line said that he initiated and facilitated weekly group discussions for QLBTQ students of color, grades 9 through 12. But notice what I did is I changed that to more that he developed and facilitated programming to improve confidence and communication skills. So in his initial one, he just said what he did. What I tried to incorporate is what was he trying to accomplish. Also, if you noticed before, it talked in this position, he would be working directly with board members. So if he's had any experience with doing monthly reports, he should include that information as well. That third bullet, he talked about he initiated outdoor leadership programs, implemented individualized student development plans, bonding activities, etc. So again, I went ahead and tweaked it to talk about the fact that he was utilizing individual student plans, created targeted leadership programming, again, resulting in increased academic performance and trust scores of participants. Similarly, the next category of fundraising. He talked about he advocated for, received and administered $3,000 activities in a field trip budget. Kind of changed that a little bit to say he successfully led a fundraising campaign, securing money. Maybe he created a fundraising strategy template to more effectively source prospective donors. And then he effectively managed the budget and leveraged assets to secure additional matching funding from foundations and local businesses. So again, as you're developing your resumes, try to put your recruiting hat on and and think about adding value to your resume. Okay, because at the end of the day, that is what the employer is going to be looking for. If we go to community collaborations, he said he collaborated in roundtable discussions with multidisciplinary team members and agency staff to plan X, Y, and Z, participating in client outreach activities, engagement with CalWorks, which is the organization that he was working with. I think it's more beneficial because they talked about collaborating with the community, is that to really mention maybe some of those organizations, partnering with Health and Human Services, maybe Jobs and Family Services, maybe Children's Services, to develop a comprehensive strategy to address obesity, serving on countywide task forces, that he led the behavioral intervention team providing logistics support, and again, outreach and education, again, to increase community utilization of services. So again, it's not just about what he did, but maybe what value he added or what he was trying to accomplish. My final category, he talked about the fact that he supervised 5 resident counselors in a college prep boarding school. Kind of changed that a little bit to maybe give him 3 separate bullets. Supervised and provided training, which is one of the requirements of the actual job description. Facilitated biweekly trainings for the organization. Maybe created evaluation and diagnostic rubrics for incoming patients, again, to streamline services. He talked about that he coordinated mentoring success at program sites. Well, one of the things that I didn't show you, but I saw in the job description, part of his role was to work with multiple mentoring programs under the umbrella of Neighborhood Leadership Institute. So I went ahead and changed his bullet to that he led the Mentoring for Success program, which included program oversight, recruitment, and evaluation of program effectiveness. So again, there's slight tweaks, but again, it's really using the information that they had and really putting it in a different format to, again, make him a more viable candidate. So kind of the summary here on the left, effective resume writing, it does take time. It really, really does. And you need to properly assess what the roles are that you're applying to and what your qualifications are, because those things are key in really how you approach the actual process of writing that resume. Submitting the resume is only one part of the job search. In fact, it's a pretty small percentage. Most studies say that it's probably 10, maybe 10 to 15% of your time is actually writing that resume. A lot of what you do prior to is the research, maybe the networking, and a host of other things, that maybe having conversations with either existing employers or previous employers to really get a sense of whether or not it's the right fit for you. So again, that resume is a small amount of time that you spend to actually do that. And I always tell students there's no best resume. There's only your resume. And you need to feel confident and take all of the information that, let's say, a staff professional provides, a little bit of the information or a little bit of both. It's really up to you, and it's your best resume, and there's no magic bullet. So I had 8 keys in the beginning. I've narrowed them down to 4. In you writing your resume, make sure to research and plan for it. Make sure to try as best you can to focus on the outcomes that you've generated, the impact that you made, or the value that you brought to the roles that you had as you're writing the resume. Obviously, one size does not fit all. And again, have someone proof your resume at the end before you actually submit it. So that concludes my section. Now I'm going to turn it over to Meredith. I'm going to stop sharing, and she's going to talk about cover letters.
Thanks, Brian. Okay, so I just want to highlight one thing that Brian said. I loved the, how you add value to the places, how you added value to the places you work is really an important part of the resume. And I think the essential transition that then happens in the cover letter, you don't want it to be a list of that resume, right? The real move that needs to then happen is, how do you take those outcomes, those values, those impacts that you highlighted in your resume, and how do you argue that you can bring those to the new organization? How do you argue that, the new organization you're applying for can benefit from all of those things? And that's work that your resume is not doing, right? So that's really, you got to explicitly do that in the cover letter, which is hard. It's just hard to do that for an organization that you don't have much interaction with, which is, again, why Brian said that it's only 10%. So much of what you have to do then is talk to other people who, are at the company and really explore their website to find those types of really specific connections. Okay, so I'm going to focus on 2 things today that I think I didn't learn till later in the cover letter writing process that I want y'all to keep in mind. One is writing for a busy reader, because I think one thing I want you to keep in mind with, just as Brian said, how they're spending 10 minutes looking at your resume, your cover letter kind of also has to be skimmable. And I'll talk a little bit about writing strategies you can use to make that cover letter a really quick read for someone who has read 1,000 of these a day and really can't search for your story like within your paragraphs. And the second thing I'm going to talk about is, really tailoring that cover letter to a specific role, and how do you do that? So I'm just going to share the Philip Lakey sample, and I'm actually just going to show you the old sample, because I do think that this author does a decent job of tailoring it to whatever position they were applying for. And I just want to show you that switching out just the name of the organization is not going to be enough to get Philip where he needs to go to apply for this executive director position that we're talking about. So let me just go ahead, and I'm just going to read aloud actually the first 3 paragraphs while sharing my screen, so that we can all just have a basis for. Okay. All right, so here is the cover letter. Just highlighting a little bit of formatting. It's neat, it's business formatted. That's really good. Dear Ms. Alon, I just want to highlight too, it's really important to look up the titles of the person you're writing to. So really do a lot of work. I think, how Brian was saying, one little mistake can either push you in either direction. I also think that's in the cover letter. If someone has done the work of spelling the person's name right, looking up their titles, that's a sign that kind of already before even reading it, it's like, okay, this person has really researched this. So I'm just going to read kind of the first 3 paragraphs aloud so you can get a sense of this cover letter. Dear Ms. Alon, I'm writing to apply for the clinician position posted on the White Mountain Academy website. I will be earning my MSW this August from the Smith College School for Social Work and would bring this opportunity strong clinical skills, working with at-risk youth in therapeutic schools, and experience in environmental education and leadership training. I think it's great to end your entrant. One skimmable thing is that it's great to end your intro paragraph with this kind of thesis statement, right? It's a statement that's like, identifies with you, is kind of the strongest reason that this organization might benefit from your skills. And the beginning is, again, very clear, like, I bet that this was one of the requirements for this job. And you know how Brian said some things are going to remain the same from cover letter to cover letter. I think, like, speaking to some of the major requirements here, if there are degree or certification requirements right in the beginning, that's very important. And that can kind of happen in the same way for each job. But let's turn again to here. Okay, during my clinical internship at SFUSD, I provided individual and group therapy to culturally diverse students, similar to the client population at WMA. This is, I think, a really good move, right? Highlighting clearly this client population at the White Mountain Academy is similar to a previous place of employment. That wouldn't have jumped out on the resume. And I think, you know, what you can't do is just take this out and put, I forget the name of the organization that's the job ad that Brian showed, the National.
Neighborhood Leadership Institute.
Thank you. You know, you can't just put Neighborhood Leadership Institute in here. To kind of update your cover letter for that, you really have to think about, okay, I think this is very relevant for social work, and a good tool for tailoring your cover letter to a specific organization. Like, who is the population they're working with? Have I worked with those populations before? And then we kind of get a little bit more personal here. What interests me most about working with adolescents is how their self-esteem and growth are affected by their success in school, activities, and relationships as they attempt to find their place in the world. Again, this is a sentence that can't be on a resume. It's also giving the readers a sense of your values, your relationship to this work, which I think is nice. And then it ends, my work at SFUSD drew on my flexibility, imagination, and ability to establish and maintain rapport, skills I would be excited to bring to WMA. This isn't like super specific, just these are skills that I would bring to the organization, but I actually think it matters a lot. Just to like reiterate the skills in your paragraph and say that you have the new organization in mind, and that you're not just listing skills that you've gained from a previous organization. So when I think about, you know, what a skimmable cover letter looks like, I think having that kind of really important information upfront with this kind of thesis statement that I definitely change for every job, right? Like, this person's bringing strong clinical skills working with at-risk youth. They're now applying to a program where all those words that Brian mentioned were community, leadership, and I'll pop onto the organization's website in a second just to show you how those words pop up. But here, you're definitely going to want your thesis statement-y sentence to maybe have leadership. You know, I bring leadership experience to this role from my past experiences. The other thing about skimmability that I want to highlight are really strong topic sentences. You want these topic sentences to be very direct and very simple, and the rest of the paragraph should really just be support for that topic sentence. So the reason why I think topic sentences are so important is because, let's say someone skimmed your cover letter, then they're looking at their resume and they're like, oh, yeah, they did work here. Did they mention that in their cover letter? If they're coming back and they want to find where that is, all they have to do is look at that first sentence to know where they could get more information. And they can kind of summarize your profile really easily if you just read the first sentence kind of every paragraph. So I think, yeah, topic sentences and a very nice like thesis statement-y kind of statement that ties all your experiences together are ways to make it skimmable. And then ways to tailor it to a specific audience, I think, is explicitly highlighting similarities between what you've done and the current company, for example, a client population, and also explicitly highlighting skills that you're bringing. And my third one I wrote down was, yeah, mention or using words from the company's website. So I'm just going to flip over to the website right now, and that'll be the last thing I do. But I think, like, you know, clearly this organization had a lot of outdoor leadership emphasis, which is not going to be really relevant anymore to the new job. And if we go ahead, let me stop share for a sec. I just want to pull up the new website of the actual job. Here. Okay, here we go. Awesome. So here's the Neighborhood Leadership Institute. And here's again a PDF of the job description. But again, you want to like glance through the overview, you know, look at their website, click on their mission statement, click on their history, look at the words that they're emphasizing and use those words. Not only is it going to elevate you kind of like in an AI world where a computer is searching for keywords, but I know that when I've read applications, you know, for writing consultants, people who apply for writing consultants, when they're using words from our mission, I'm like, oh, this person has the same, you know, philosophy as I do. And even though they didn't pull that from nowhere, it still feels like that person's a better fit, which I think is a really, really important move. And again, I think Brian showed this, where here's the responsibilities, but again, this required qualifications and preferred qualifications are the most important things to address. And what I tend to do when I write cover letters is I group some of these into categories that could make good paragraphs, and I write my paragraphs about those things. I don't just go in and say, you know, what are the greatest things that I could bring to this organization? I really look at these categories, and definitely, like, you might want to have like a leadership category that could have a fundraising component and an admin component within it. So I do think that, like, again, using the words develop, using maintain partnerships, all in your cover letter are going to be really, really important. Last thing I want to show you is the Writing Center website. Oops, I just pulled my tab out of there. There we go. Okay. I think if you leave with anything, leave with the idea that these documents really need to be read by someone else. I think especially at the beginning, until you kind of get a feel for how they go, because you never know, like, we all sound great in our own heads, and really every writer needs a reader. Like, you're not going to know how this comes off until you get a reader in front of it who says, wow, I got a little confused here, or I can't see how you're arguing that you have experience in X, Y, or Z. So I do want to highlight the Writing Center. Most of our writing consultants are teachers like me in the first year writing program, but we have consultations regularly on PhD theses, any type of writing, professional writing. And we're often in contact with folks in Brian's office, so we can pass you there if we feel like we can't answer some of those questions. What I feel like we do really well is we've got a lot of different writing strategies for something like making things skimmable, or how to get started even. We can help you get started. But I think most of all, like, all of our consultants have a lot of experience reading professional writing, and I think they provide a really good low stakes first set of eyes on a document like this, even just to get an initial reaction. Yeah, and I mean, this type of writing is I think really hard. And I would say come to us early before you have a draft, so we can talk about some of those kind of writer's blocky situations, because I know that when I talk with someone, it moves me past that writer's block way faster than me stewing in a room alone about it. So please click the make an appointment button right here. If you just put Writing Center CWRU into Google, this is the first thing that comes up. So you'll be able to find us. And yeah, I would also say, Brian, if you've got anything to add about the cover letter, please do.
Great example and great comments. I like that writing for the busy reader because it does have to be very concise. The one thing I want to say, and I tell students, because they always ask, they're not asking me for a cover letter. Should I send one? My response is most job descriptions have a requirement, either require or preferred, and they talk about and stress the importance of strong oral and/or written communication skills. The resume is a fairly static document, but the cover letter will allow you, as Meredith was talking, to kind of elaborate a little more on what was in that resume, but it also allows you to demonstrate your strong written and/or communication skills as well. So, but definitely on point.
All righty. Well, thank you both, Meredith and Brian. At this time, we're going to open it up for any questions. I know we had a couple questions that was submitted before the workshop, and we had one in the chat, but at this time, we're going to open it up for anyone here that has any questions. All righty, well, I'll just start by reading a question in the chat. I noticed that the updated resume version have longer sentences in the role description. How does this support with the time needed to read? So I believe she feel like the resume is now like a longer version or more to read. So how would you answer that?
So Meredith, could you share your screen and literally put the Philip's existing resume up? And it may have looked longer on the screen, but typically it's not. And as you will see, my bullets are a lot shorter than what you will see once Meredith pulls it up. One of the things that I try to tell students is when you're doing your bullets, you want to try as best you can to get them on one line. And typically you want, depending upon the time frame, you want that you were actually at the experience, you want to have anywhere between 3 to 4 bullets. So if we look at this social work intern here, that's a lot of and just if you just scroll down, that's a lot of reading on each bullet. That is not written for the busy reader. Okay, so as you're looking at crafting those bullets, it's critically important to try to keep them on one line. And as I try to do is, I think they were initially about 5 or 6 categories that this person had, and I reduced them to maybe 4. To again talk about to make it much more user friendly, because some of the things that obviously were in this resume were not really relevant. So
Thank
I hope
you,
that
Brian.
answers the question.
Thank you, Emanuela, for that question. And then we have another question that was sent before. If you have multiple positions within one organization, should they be separated if currently employed with 2 titles? So should those jobs be separated within the resume?
Yes, because what you've been doing in role 1 or position 1 could have some relevancy to the position you're applying to. and what you were doing in role 2 at your existing employer could have some relevancy. So you don't want to put all that up underneath one title or one position. And I think that also speaks to your maybe versatility, your ability to do more than one job or fulfill more than one role at a time. So they should be separate. But again, I would probably lean towards maybe 2 of the most relevant things in that specific role that are relevant, obviously, to the position that you're applying for.
All righty, thank you, Brian. And then the last question is it best to have several versions of your resume or one resume that can translate to different jobs?
You want to take a stab at that, Meredith?
Sure, I'll just share my own strategy. I have one resume or like one CV resume with like everything from my life in it. So it's just like, I mean, I still have undergrad internships in this document, but it is just, and what I do is I do make a new resume for every kind of different job. And I'll pull the most relevant things, but I do keep like a giant document of, you know, all of the things. And I do structure them differently. So just an example from my own situation, right now I'm in a role where I'm like 75% teaching, 25% student support. And like previously I'd been applying to jobs that were the complete reverse. So 75% student support and like only a little bit of teaching. And my resume changed drastically between those 2 jobs, because I would front my, you know, student support experiences and then like mention the teaching only a little bit. So I do think, you know, having a big document where you keep all your experiences is really helpful, but also doing multiple resumes for the job is essential to cater to that reader who's only looking at their own interests. Like, yeah.
I also want to add that on many resumes that I see with students, they have their skills section or their certification section at the bottom. I highly recommend you don't do that, because if I'm going through a boatload of resumes, I'm specifically looking for individuals who have certain skill sets or certifications. And if yours isn't directly up underneath your education section, I gotta go. Because again, you've got maybe 10 seconds for me to really want more of your resume. And even if I read your resume and I really want to learn more, that's where that cover letter comes in handy. But if I'm reading the resume and you don't have a cover letter attached, and I want to know more, you're potentially putting yourself at a disadvantage to the student who does have a resume and who can elaborate more, like Meredith talked about.
All righty, thanks. I think we have a couple more questions in the chat now. It was originally recommended to me to keep the resume to 1 page, but do you think it's still skimmable if it takes up 2 pages? So is that still good if it's a 2-page resume?
I'll let Meredith chime in as well, but you know, as master's students, you guys many of you have a great deal of experience, and you can't, or you may not be able to keep it in one page. So I think it's acceptable for it to go to 2 pages, but always be thinking in your mind, sometimes less is more. So think about relevance. So it may not be a full 2 pages, but it might be 1.5 pages. But if you're a first or second year student and looking for your first internship, there's no way you should have, in my opinion, a 2-page resume. So, but obviously the audience here, it's more likely that you're going to have probably more than 1 page. Meredith?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I'd say like, you know, sometimes I'll see resumes where they've stretched the margins in order to fit it on a page, and like it's all in there, and like I've done that. And in academia, which is where I've ended up, that's less of an issue. But I think for other organizations outside of academia, I do think like providing that space, that breathability, if you will, of a resume does a lot for a reader who is skimming. So just giving them time to pause between sections with a little bit of white space, I think is worth the 1.5 pages rather than a page. So it's not just the fact that it's on one page that makes it skimmable. It's also the kind of space you give between the sections so that I can end one and move on to the next one, that I think, is important.
All righty, and then do you recommend a bio in a resume? Some people do and some don't.
And this ties into another sort of question, and feel free to clarify if the person is here around, and it might be a separate, but LinkedIn bios, and like if that's similar to.
Well, I just meant like this little introduction at the top of the,
Yeah.
under your name in the resume.
Mhm.
I'm a fan personally of a kind of a statement of qualifications or a summary statement, maybe 2 or 3 sentences up underneath, your name and your LinkedIn profile. I'm a fan of that because it kind of allows me as the reader the opportunity to kind of either see what you're interested in immediately, speak to, or see what skill sets that you have, and it might encourage me to kind of go a little farther. If I just get your resume and there's nothing there except your name and LinkedIn profile, I don't really know what you're interested in. So if at the end of the day, you need to market your strongest skill sets and qualities and experiences and tell me why you are applying or what you're interested in. And if it's not there, I'm not going to know.
Thank you.
I think too that is applicable to like nonprofit students because it can be varying, depending on the position. Maybe social work students, it's not like there's a cue in when you see a social work student versus a nonprofit student, if that's helpful too.
Yeah. And it looks like we're getting more and more questions in the chat. So is there a preferred font size or letter size for the resume to eliminate having to adjust margins?
I'll let Meredith tackle that one.
I definitely never go below 11. And even then 11 in certain fonts is a lot smaller than 11 in other fonts. Part of skimmability is also accessibility and allowing folks to be able to actually read the resume without, holding it up to their faces. So I also will not have more than 2 different sizes. I will always have only one font, and I try not to have too many different sizes of text in a resume because that also gets confusing to look at. I don't know if there's a preferred font. I think like not, obviously not Comic Sans, and one that's hard to read. I don't know, Brian, do you have any font,
I don't know if there's a preferred font, but I've got a preferred font and it's Times New Roman. I'm old school. 12 point I think is fine, but I've seen it as little as 10. 10 can be a little difficult to read sometimes. So I would go to Meredith's point, no less than 11. But in terms of the fonts, Times New Roman is safe. And I think you as in your resume as well, you should really utilize the bold function to really delineate different categories. So don't always use, you're going to have to use bold to delineate categories. But in terms of font size, no less than 12. And I would try, if at all possible as well, to avoid italics.
Yeah, I think bold is your friend, spacing is your friend, and those are the 2, and bullet points are the kind of the things that I use for structure. I use Arial as my font of choice. But again, I think the the formatting, well, actually, I shouldn't say that because that's personal preference. For me, the formatting of it is more important than the font size, and the font size should be readable. And I don't know if I have heard somewhere that it, does having a unique font like set you apart in a resume situation, but I'm always like working against the deadline, and I like never have time to be like, what font will set me apart? So I'm like, Ariel, go, let me concentrate on my verbs, is usually my thought process.
Yeah, I think I'm more old school like Brian, the Time New Roman 12. Yeah. So, but yeah, thanks. And then we just have a couple more questions. One is, can you speak about the importance of students highlighting their skills and experience gained from practicum and field education in their resumes, or even in their cover letters?
Is this from Emanuele?
No, this is actually from Kim.
Yeah, I think that's critically important. It's a little self-serving, but I think it's critically important because it really allows you to showcase not only what you did in that internship or practicum experience, but it also allows you, especially if it's part-time, it allows you to demonstrate your ability to not only maintain your academics, but at the same time balance that with your, getting some practical experience. So I think that's huge. So yes.
I just wanted to chime in too. I know it's like we're both chiming in, but when I was applying to jobs as I graduated with my social work degree, a job recommended to me actually afterwards to put field practicum versus internship. And you can put specialized field practicum versus or generalist field practicum. So I've often advised students on that. But again, it's personal preference, because sometimes internship and field practicum, there's differentiating kind of connotations with that. So yeah, I just wanted to say that as we were talking about it.
If I could as well, if I could share my screen once more, because we were talking about formatting. We've got a document, which I believe, Kelly, you said that maybe you've used, but it's called the Career Search Guide. You could literally, many of you guys have used that. We have the Career Search Guide, and literally they've got resume examples in this here. And we talk about, again, writing for the busy reader. I always tell students about the importance of space, as you see on this left-hand side, very easy to read. This is not bad, but it's not as easy to read. But if you go down here to this Salma student on the left, I love the content of how this student put this information in here, but it's a lot of information. And even if you compare this Gabrielle Lynn here, again, this could be great content, but this is very, very difficult to read. So you always need to strike the balance between, again, the information that you're putting in there and be sensitive to how is this going to come off to the reader.
All righty, thank you. And then we have another question. Do you recommend adding extracurricular groups or organizations to your resume?
My initial reaction is, from Brian's presentation, I think if it's relevant, you don't want to add something that kind of feels completely out of the blue. But I do think adding organizations that you've worked with that are relevant to the job are going to be really important. Like, in the neighborhood leadership program job ad, if you clicked on programs on their website, they had a whole different type of programs, some for parents, some for youth. And if you volunteered at a youth, thing or something, adding that right at the bottom, I think couldn't hurt you. But I do think it's all about relevance.
All righty, well, do we have any other questions? No more questions. Well, thank you again, Meredith and Brian. I hope you all found this information helpful as you start your job search or applying for field placement, and you're able to use up some of what you learned today in your job search or your field placement. Kim, did you want to say anything in closing to Brian and Meredith?
Just want to extend my gratitude to both Brian and Meredith for all of your support with today's session. And I know this will be covered, but we'll be sure to share out the resources that were given today so that you're equipped moving forward as you apply for different jobs and positions. And again, feel free to reach out to our team if you have any other suggestions. As we're building out our career series, we're here to support students and hope this was helpful.